What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined by my main man, Steven Thompson. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talker. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast, the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's a couple of names that I think have emerged as potential candidates that we should probably talk about. Some through free agency, other via trade. All three interesting names. We're going to dive into all of those, and then some words on the Steelers running backs that, man, just sometimes it's better to keep a thought to yourself, as your mother probably taught you growing up. We're going to dive into all that plus more. Make sure to subscribe to our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk Clips, for even more All Steelers Talk. Steven, it's a solar lunar eclipse. It's one of the eclipse days. You feeling a little funky? How you feeling, my friend?
No, I don't feel funky. I don't know how I feel about the eclipse. I saw one when I was in high school, but I have my eclipse glasses and be very safe. I'm not going to be looking at any sun today. But am I going to dedicate, a chunk of my day to go and look at the eclipse? I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to do that.
I would say zero chance that I didn't even know it was happening until my mom called me about 40 times over the weekend. It was like, hey, did you get your glasses? I was like, I didn't know. Well, I don't know what I need glasses for. But
yeah, my dad texted me this morning like, oh, do you have glasses? And I was like, well, yeah, I do. But if I didn't, I don't know where I would get them. I don't even know what time this thing is supposed to happen at.
It's a good chunk of time in Pittsburgh. It's like 2 to 4:30. Pittsburgh's supposed to be the place where you get like one of the best views of this thing. So good for Pittsburgh if you are in the city. I mean, check it out. I mean, I don't know how often it happens, but that's super cool. There's no chance I'm going to check this thing out.
Well, that's the other thing. They told me, this only happens once every, 150 years? I don't know what the exact number is. But I also saw one in high school. This stuff happens a lot more regularly than I think they tell us, than they lead us to believe.
I would imagine so. I also, don't know that it's the moon goes over the sun. I'm like, dude, I don't care. No part of that's like, wow, that's sick. That's a good time. I'm like, all right, cool. I watch the sunrise and set every day. I think that's pretty cool, But I mean, if you're into that stuff, if you're looking for the eclipse, I hope you enjoy it. My mom will be somewhere watching this podcast, definitely pissed off at me that we're trashing on the eclipse, but I'm sure that everybody has a good time. Stay safe with your glasses. If you guys have glasses, don't go looking at the sun. Just don't take a chance. It's not worth it. Or you could join me and just watch it on YouTube afterwards.
There we go.
That's probably going to be what I do. Let's talk some Pittsburgh Steelers football. Over the weekend, a couple of names got tossed out there as potential free agency signings, some via trade that I think is a very interesting name to watch. I'm excited that a former player kind of ignited the conversation, and I'm excited to kind of dive into that. Plus two names, one that we've talked about a bunch throughout this free agency process that as time passes just makes more and more sense for this team, or maybe doesn't make sense. We're going to kind of voice our opinions, and this is a new name that we'll dive into that could boost the Steelers offense that I don't know why we haven't brought up yet, but it's very interesting to dive into. Before we do that, let's talk some Steelers running backs. Over the weekend, Nick Wright of First Things First just had one awful opinion on the Pittsburgh Steelers running back situation, saying, quote, the Steelers do not have good weapons. I think Najee is below average flatly, which is just who uses the word flatly? Weird. I think Jaylen Warren, every team's got a Jaylen Warren, a guy who, if you can get 6 carries a game, looks dynamic. If you are in today's game, do you not? And if you are in today's game and do not have a Jaylen Warren, what are you doing? They're wide receivers. They have that is talented. A total of, this guy doesn't make any sense, and he speaks. Quote, they're wide receivers. They have that is talented, is total male content. In that, do they have the worst weapons? Obviously. First off, wherever I'm reading this quote from, I don't think transcribed it correctly, so my apologies there. Second, I mean, is that possibly, it's half right. The Steelers don't have a good wide receivers core. I think we've talked about that plenty this offseason, and I think that's the biggest topic of conversation right now is how do you add to that and give Russell Wilson and Justin Fields some weapons before the season starts, but we have ideas of how that's going to happen. When it comes to the running back, I mean, that's going to be the Steelers' offense. Is Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren ground and pound football with Arthur Smith running the show? Apparently, they're not very good. Your thoughts? You had some interesting ones before we jumped on here, so I figured it's time to let you kind of voice your opinion.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I don't think he's wrong that they don't have great wide receivers. I don't think that's debatable, but I also think that's something the Steelers know and that they have. I don't know. There's at least a path to improving them. There's a plan to improve them. It's probably going to be through the NFL draft. So like I can't, really fault him there. I don't know if George Pickens is a malcontent. I think that's who he was referring to, but that's a different issue. He also doesn't mention Pat Freiermuth at all, which I think is, a mistake. He's part of the receiving core. But yeah, I took the biggest issue with what he said about the running backs. And I mean, like, I think he's wrong about Najee Harris. Like, to say he's average, I mean, this is a guy who's rushed for 3,000 yards, more than 3,000 yards over the past 3 seasons. He's gotten even stronger as his year has gone on. Despite all the usage, he had arguably the best season of his career last year, while he was splitting carries with Jaylen Warren, who that's what I really got annoyed about, was that the idea that every team has a Jaylen Warren, has a guy who can take 6 carries and look really dynamic. First of all, Jaylen Warren takes a lot more than 6 carries a game. But also he finished 34th in the league in scrimmage yards last year. I mean, he was ahead of guys like Devontae Adams, Jerome Ford, Deebo Samuel, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Smith, Austin Eckler. He put up more yards than Austin Eckler. Yeah. And you look at the top 40 of, guys who gained scrimmage yards this year. Jaylen Warren, the only one who didn't start a game, in the top 40, and he was in the top 40 in scrimmage yards. This idea that every team has Jaylen Warren is simply not true. He was 4th in the league in yards per carry. At some point, that stuff just isn't to treat it as if it's like a fluke. That Jaylen Warren was productive is pretty ridiculous to me. I don't know what other team has a Jaylen Warren. No. I mean, I think the closest thing you get is Detroit with Gibbs and Montgomery. But even then, I don't that's not every team. That's one team.
It's one team.
It's right. It's I don't know. I think that's kind of a lazy take. I think it's someone who hasn't looked at the Steelers that closely, and which is fine. There are only so many games you can watch in a given week, but you just got to look at the numbers. This isn't a fluke. This isn't, this is who Jaylen Warren is, man. He's explosive, and he's gotten plenty of touches and plenty of opportunities to prove it. So, that on top of the saying that Najee is average thing, that really rubbed me the wrong way. Cause I don't think that's someone who's watched the Steelers with any kind of a watchful eye over the past couple of years, or especially last year.
No chance. So the Najee Harris thing, I think, I get it. If you didn't watch every snap of Pittsburgh Steelers football in 2023, you could come away with the opinion of Najee Harris is a little overrated, and he didn't have the success that I think guys are, and people are trying to make him something that he is. If you actually watch the games, you realize just how crucial Najee Harris was down the stretch. And don't get me wrong, first half of the season, Najee Harris, and second half of the season, Najee Harris. Second half of the season, Najee Harris was much better than first half of the season, Najee Harris. But still, it was when the Steelers needed a running game, when they needed a strong offense, when they had any bit of a passing game whatsoever, Najee Harris came to life, which is, all you could ask for, really. Jaylen Warren's been a monster. And, that's just a guy that anybody who really watches the Pittsburgh Steelers, you would make a case and have a pretty strong case that Jaylen Warren could probably start on a good chunk of teams in the NFL. And the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers have him as a number 2 it's not a fluke. It is a fluke. It's a fluke that they got lucky enough to get a Jaylen Warren as an undrafted guy out of Oklahoma State. That shouldn't have happened. You look at who Jaylen Warren is and what Jaylen Warren does, not every team has a Jaylen Warren. You could look at the production and say, yeah, he's a great runner. He could catch the football out of the backfield. Just go look at his runs. Go look at the times that, he takes it 60 yards to the house. Go look at the times where he's jumping over guys. Go look at the times where he turns a 4-yard run into a 9-yard run because he breaks 3 tackles and spins out of somebody. And go look at the drives where he's the only running back out there for a whole drive and looks damn good as the only running back out there for a whole drive. Go look at the times where he lays people out as a blocker. Like, what Jaylen Warren does is not, oh man, Jaylen Warren, you can find Jaylen Warren everywhere. Nah, I don't think that's the case. I don't think there are Jaylen Warrens on other teams. I think that you could look at, like, the Cincinnati Bengals are the first team that came to mind for me. You look at the Cincinnati Bengals, and Zach Moss, cool. I hope he does well. I'm always pro player. He's not Jaylen Warren. They'd take Jaylen Warren over Zach Moss any day of the week. I don't think there's 32 Jaylen Warrens out there. I don't think there's 10. And the fact that the Steelers have 2 of them, Jaylen Warren would be a starter if Najee Harris wasn't a first-round pick. And that's not a knock on Najee Harris. Najee Harris is a first-round pick, and he's worthy of being a first-round pick. But if the Steelers didn't have Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren would be the guy, 0 questions asked.
Yeah, there are Jaylen Warrens elsewhere in the league. Like, there's guys who are similar production and play similar styles. The thing is, those guys are usually starters in the NFL. Like, they're not riding the bench behind Najee. Like, teams have Jaylen Warrens. They don't have teams have Najee Harris's. They don't have both of them at the same time, and that's what makes the Steelers really unique. Especially, like you alluded to, this is just going to be who they are. Like, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to run the ball all over the field this year, and it's because they have 2 great running backs. Like, they found an offensive coordinator that fit their personnel, and their personnel leans towards the run because they have 2 great running backs.
Exactly. This was all by design. They knew what they were getting into. To say that there's no weapons, I understand when you're talking about the passing game and, only having George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth, but there are a lot of teams out there that have less than George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth and still have an opportunity to add to it because the rest of their offense is good. And most times, you could look at Tennessee for a long time. People talked about, nobody was sitting around saying Tennessee's offense is terrible. They would say Tennessee's offense is built around Derrick Henry. The Steelers' offense is built around Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, and I think that's okay. And I think everybody who knows what the Steelers are going to do this season realizes that that's a good place to be for anybody in Pittsburgh. So, Nick, I'm sorry, but sometimes you just don't have good comments. And this time, I think a really, really poor take by Nick Wright. Here's what I want to talk about next. Size matters. We all know it, and it's important to remember it in times of need. I recently went to a small law firm in hopes of getting the compensation I felt I deserved. I didn't, and to this day, I still think about the money that I may have missed out on. I filled out mounds of paperwork, then waited around for what felt like forever, got phone call after phone call telling me what I did not do right in the process, and it was expensive. All to get underwhelming compensation and almost 0 satisfaction. Fortunately, if you ever get seriously injured and want to file a claim, you don't have to go through the same hassle I did. Instead, you can make it way easier by finding out if you have a claim in just a few clicks on your phone and working with America's biggest injury law firm with the promise of being for the people. Here comes Morgan & Morgan, today's sponsor. Morgan & Morgan has over 1,000 attorneys working in all 50 states fighting to get their clients the money they deserve. In recent months, they've achieved verdicts for their clients, including one that is worth $26 million. That is 40 times the highest insurance offer. And they're absolutely free unless you win. I got lowballed. Don't make the same mistake I did. Fighting big companies takes a big firm. And with America's biggest injury law firm, you're ready to take on insurance companies of any size. Don't overthink it. You can start your claim in just a few clicks by following the link in our description or by going to www.forthepeople.com/allsteelers. It only takes a few minutes to find out if you have a case. And if you have, it might be worth millions. Let's talk about a couple of names that I think the Steelers could still potentially add as we move towards the end of free agency, more towards the NFL draft. In the upcoming weeks, all we're going to do is talk NFL draft. Who are they going to go after? What's their big board look like? Our mock drafts. I'm thinking about dropping a mock draft tomorrow, so Everybody stick around for that bad boy. I was thinking about it today. Then I spent the weekend dealing with a sick cat. So mine was not, I tried to sit down and say, it was last night. It was, I don't know, 11:30 last night or something like that. And I was sitting there and I was like, all right, let's write this mock draft. And I went to write a name down and I went, nah, this is going to be a really bad mock draft. Yeah. This is not happening tonight. Maybe tomorrow night. So I'm thinking tomorrow morning I'll have a mock draft 2.0 out for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Meanwhile, there are still names that the Steelers can add. One through free agency that I think is very interesting to talk about. The other through a trade that I also think is very interesting and has, well, a connection to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll start with the bigger name here, Justin Simmons, safety, free agent, former Denver Bronco. We've talked about him so many times on this show throughout the last couple of weeks. He still goes unsigned. I talked to a Broncos person yesterday, asked why is there no traction here? Why is it? I don't even see headlines about where Justin Simmons might land. And they were just as dumbfounded as me and just said, hey, it's kind of hard to tell what his market is right now because the guy should sign for plus $10 million, but maybe people aren't interested in signing him for plus $10 million. But at the same time, maybe people are just trying to wait to see if that price tag is going to drop. And if it doesn't, then they're still going to give him the money that he probably deserves. It's a very sticky and somewhat unknown situation when it comes to him. Arthur Moats, former linebacker of the Steelers, dropped on his podcast, the Arthur Moats Experience, that he thinks that Justin Simmons can be a guy that fixes the Pittsburgh Steelers. I've mentioned this before, as early as or as late as last week, saying if the Steelers need a slot corner, maybe they just go sign Justin Simmons and make one of their safeties a slot corner. I don't know. You still think Justin Simmons is on the board for the Pittsburgh Steelers? And do you think it would solve most likely their last remaining need on defense?
Yeah, I'm not so sure. And especially just kind of at that price point, like he's going to be upwards of $10 million for a team that's already kind of struggling in terms of cap space. Like it's not unlimited there. Like this would basically eat up all of their remaining cap space. And they still need a little bit to hold on to going into the NFL draft. I don't know. The addition of Deshaun Elliott just makes me think they've kind of moved on, Justin Simmons is a great player. And he would have been incredibly valuable for the Steelers, but I don't know. You got your other starting safety. Like I don't think that Justin Simmons can kind of meaningfully address what holes they do have. Like if you're, I don't know, you need like a slot corner too. You need probably another outside corner if you want to be real safe about it. Like you need D tackle. Like I don't know. I feel like that money is better spent elsewhere. Justin Simmons is kind of a luxury item, and it's not one that the Steelers really need right now, quite honestly. Like I feel pretty comfortable with where they're at least as far as safety goes, to be quite honest. And I just don't see Simmons as realistic. I'm not sure I see the argument on this one.
So let me toss out a situation here, a scenario here. Let me see your opinion. I do agree that I think the Steelers, if they just move forward as is right now, I'm comfortable with their safety room. I like how it looks. I feel good about Deshaun Elliott. I think he's young and versatile, and I think he can make some impact. He's a sure tackler. He'd probably work really well with what DeMonte KZ and Minkah Fitzpatrick bring to the team. I'm all about it. Let me toss this out. If the Steelers were able to add a corner, but maybe the middle of the draft, okay? They brought in Max Melton, Rutgers corner, today. I'm a huge fan of Max Melton. I was a huge fan of his brother, and now I'm a bigger fan of him.
Who's his brother?
Melton, former wide receiver. Okay. Don't know where he ended up. He was a late-round pick, but this dude was a stud coming out. I mean, he was real low-key sleeper at Rutgers, but made a lot of noise. Little dude. He's like 5'10", 5'11". I want to say maybe Denver. I don't know where he ended up, but I watched him at the Senior Bowl, and I fell in love with this dude. His brother's even better. Max Melton, inside, outside, capable corner, okay? If the Steelers were to sign Justin Simmons, and the cap space, let's remove the cap space. I don't know what the number would be. We both know that the salary cap is a myth. You could come up with ways to come up with more money. That's always on the table. But let's just say that the Steelers were able to sign Justin Simmons, okay? They move, I don't know, let's say either Deshaun Elliott or DeMonte KZ to the slot corner. You then draft Max Melton, who could play inside and outside. Your secondary now consists of Joey Porter Jr., Dante Jackson, Max Melton, DeMonte KZ, Deshaun Elliott, Minka Fitzpatrick, and Justin Simmons, all capable of playing a lot of different positions. Is that a move that you would feel comfortable with if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers and or a Pittsburgh Steelers fan?
I'm not really that sure. I mean, just because I'm not sure of how good of a slot corner Deshaun Elliott could be.
Yeah.
Like I guess you could go with Melton there, if you really feel like you need to, but then doesn't, one of Simmons or Elliott becomes kind of redundant there, right? And then it's just kind of a sunk cost.
I viewed it as Max Melton would be your all-around inside-outside guy, while one of your safeties, KZ or Elliott, and granted, neither of them have a ton of experience, but they have some experience playing slot. And I get it that's like, you're almost taking a step backwards. I understand that. You move one of them to the nickel, and then your other one plays as the third safety, while Fitzpatrick and Simmons are your starters.
I see it. That could work. You'd have to really get Elliott or KZ up to speed as far as a slot corner, and you have to do it quickly. It feels like Elliott might be the better fit there. Just maybe he's a little younger and could possibly adjust a little bit better. I feel like the ideal situation there is to hope that Max Melton can become your slot corner, full time. So I guess I see it. It could work. I mean, adding talent, obviously, not a bad thing, especially if it's a guy like Justin Simmons. Like that is a player every team would love to have. So I guess I could see how it would work. Just man, that's like we're cutting out the salary cap implications here, but that's like a big deal. It's like like I know the cap is only real to a certain extent, but you look at the Steelers roster and it's not concerning, but they are running out of ways, I think, to create some more money, there aren't a ton of options for them right now after they've made all these additions. So that's the only thing I'd be worried about. If they can somehow figure out the cap thing to make it a non-issue, then I'm all for it. And I do wonder how long Justin Simmons is going to stick on this market for. And what's that going to do to his market value, because there's no way. I mean, the longer you sit around, it's very rare that your value goes up. Especially as a safety.
So when do you think it, do you think if it goes past the NFL draft, we're looking at less than $10 million a season? Because there's a part of me that thinks that if he can make it to April 28th or whenever the last day, April 28th, I mean, I think that it goes from 10 million to maybe 5 million, maybe 7 million, depending on how good of a negotiator you are as a GM. And I think at that point, I mean, no matter what team you are, you could be any team in the NFL. You're nuts not to be like, oh yeah, no, let's just ignore Justin Simmons at $7 million.
Right. Yeah. And I think you could get down there. After, I know the safety class isn't great in the NFL draft, but that kind of means that any team that actually needs a safety is just going to pick one up in the draft. They're going to pick up the top targets available, and then you're left with the pretty underwhelming group of free agents, and obviously the both rookies and veterans as well. And I feel like that's going to artificially drive down Simmons' price. He's going to want to get on a roster as soon as possible to get integrated with the playbook and everything. So I could absolutely see that happening. Going down to $5 million would be a dream, and that would be an opportunity the Steelers should absolutely jump on. But yeah, if you can get him for $5 or $7 million, I'm all about that. That works for me. I can do that.
Dude, that's what I'm saying. If it somehow gets to that point, and I think it's got the potential to get to that point. I mean, at some point, everybody drops. Everybody has a little bit of a dip. But if it could get to that point, man, dude, the Steelers would be nuts not to at least make a phone call and just be like, hey, why not?
How low are you willing to go?
Why can't we just figure this out? I mean, there's no team in the NFL, especially the Pittsburgh Steelers, who would sit around and be like, you know what? I don't think we need more talent. I think we have enough talent. We could just sit here and be okay. There's just no shot that Omar comes to Mike Tomlin, and we've seen it happen. I was at the league meetings and I was joking with Omar because at one point he I was hanging out with a couple Steelers writers and we looked to the side and Omar comes over, he's on the phone, he grabs Mike Tomlin And we were all just like, there's no chance something's happening right now. But I could just see Omar like walking into Mike's office and being like, hey, Mike, so got a deal on the table here. Justin Simmons. Like, I don't think he's going to get a number out of his mouth before Mike's like, yep, sounds good. Yep. Nope. Okay. Yep. And I think you're crazy not to add Justin Simmons if the numbers work out. And I think the longer we go, the more interesting those numbers get to every team in the NFL, especially the Pittsburgh Steelers. The other name that Arthur Moats tossed out there that he said he'd be open to is a familiar name for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And after this, we have another name on the free agency market that I think is very, very interesting that we haven't talked about yet. But this is a good one. Arthur Smith tossed out the idea, or his co-host, Deke, I think his name is, tossed out a name. What about JuJu Smith-Schuster? New England Patriots wide receiver, signed a 3-year deal there last season. Didn't really do a ton for the Patriots, although nobody in New England really did a ton last season. I mean, you look at him as, you call New England, hey, what's a 6th round pick for JuJu Smith-Schuster? You willing to give that up type of situation? Is it enough for the Pittsburgh Steelers to say, yeah, that's 100% our wide receiver 3? Or you say, nah, maybe that's just maybe we're just tossing names out there at this point?
I would kind of hope that JuJu Smith-Schuster is not their, best bet for wide receiver 3 right now. He didn't do a lot. He went through some injuries, I think, last year in New England. Didn't play a full season, so that affected things. But even when he was on the field, just did not look particularly explosive or looked like any kind of impact player. Understanding, the limitations of, having Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi as your quarterback and all that, I understand it. But I don't think in my mind there's enough to grab onto here. I think right now you add JuJu Smith-Schuster, and then you've got, Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins, who are, for all intents and purposes, the same player. These are just 3 underwhelming slot guys fighting for one spot. And at that point, I'd just rather have Calvin Austin in there. This is I don't think this really makes any sense, especially if this was before they had signed Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson, I would have given it some thought. I think JuJu's still relatively young given his time in the league. Mm-hmm. There's a high likelihood that he could come back from whatever injuries he had and be a productive player again. But I don't know. You've already got 2 slot guys that I'm not super intrigued by in this draft already, and I don't think JuJu brings you anything different or different enough, especially to warrant a trade or giving up a draft pick this year.
Yeah, I like JuJu, and I think if JuJu's going to turn his career around, Pittsburgh might be the place to do it. He's had some good years here. I mean, his only Pro Bowl season, his only 1,000-yard seasons in Pittsburgh. His year in Kansas City was not bad. He's a 900-yard receiver in Kansas City. Now, don't get me wrong, he was wide receiver 1 in Kansas City, and with Patrick Mahomes throwing the football, I think I could have a couple dozen yards. And and I think there's potential there. I think JuJu could be. Look, I think JuJu's better than Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins, but I don't know if he's got enough upside to surpass Calvin Austin. I don't think you're looking at JuJu. I think that's what intrigues people about, or intrigues the Steelers about Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson, is just the fact that at best these guys turn into a really solid wide receiver 4. That you're like, wow, dude, we got a stud as our last wide receiver on the depth chart. And I think that's a good place to be. JuJu is you're hoping he turns into a really good wide receiver 3. And it just doesn't feel like the Steelers were ever looking for a wide receiver 3. It feels like the longer we've gone through this and the more the Tyler Boyd thing kind of sunk and all the news came out about that, and we found out that they never really tossed him any money, and there wasn't serious conversations, and they were really interested in Mike Williams. It just kind of felt like the Steelers were headhunting for a wide receiver 2, and we all assumed that they were headhunting for a wide receiver 3. And maybe that's just because they like Calvin Austin and they want to see what Calvin Austin brings to the team in year 3. And they think that the 3 of those together are just good enough. Okay, sounds good. We can make something out of this on top of Pat Freiermuth, on top of Connor Hayward, who I think is an undervalued piece to this whole puzzle, is, the way that they could utilize Connor Hayward in year 3. And I think they could look at it like that and just say, like, you know, we're good. You know, there's just nothing that indicates to me the Steelers are looking for a wide receiver 3. It's always been, you know, we need a wide receiver 2, and they just didn't get one. And I think that's what gets in my way. Otherwise, it'd be like, you know, what would the Patriots give up for or ask for JuJu? Nothing.
Like nothing. Yeah, it'd be like a bag of balls. Like, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's more about like a roster spot at this point than any kind of like that. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. You add JuJu, and then you've got 3 wide receivers who do pretty much the same thing, all eating up 3 different roster spots. And like, that's not really worth it in my mind. I mean, it seems redundant to have Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson on the same roster.
Quez Watkins and Calvin, they're the same. Van Jefferson's like a tall, lengthy, kind of physical dude. The other 2 are like speedy guys. And I feel like those 2,
but they all play the same. They all play the same position.
Yeah, they're all gonna play. Van will be a little bit everywhere, but I agree with you. Like, he's kind of pointless. But they all play. They're all wide receiver 4s at best. You know, like they're all like a bottom of the depth chart. They're filler guys. You know, they have a bunch of which is what JuJu is at this point, is a filler.
Right, exactly. And you need not filler. You need, like, you know, you need someone who can make some plays for you. And I'm just not. I wouldn't feel comfortable relying on any of those guys saying you're my wide receiver 2 this year.
No, I agree. I think if it's going to happen, if it ever would happen, it'd be in the middle of the summer, you know, middle of training camp, near end of training camp. JuJu's not going to make the team. He's not really looking that great. They make a couple of phone calls. JuJu ends up in Pittsburgh because they're like, why not? You know, like, why wouldn't we just add JuJu back to the roster for absolutely nothing? And, you know, you're giving up like a conditional 7th round pick next year, and that's good enough. Like, I think that could be the move. Right now. It just, at this point, the wide receiver market is all a bunch of nobodies. The Steelers got enough nobodies. They need somebody. They don't seem to be interested in nobodies. They seem to be interested in the big names. He's not. Plus, like Jerry Dulac, somebody said it to me. They were texting me asking me about JuJu over the weekend, and they said, they were like, well, Jerry Dulac said there could be a trade of significance. I was like, yeah, exactly.
It's not JuJu Smith-Schuster trade. That's
you just made the point for yourself there, pal. It's not. There's no significance in JuJu in the same sentence. And again, I think JuJu, if he's going to turn his career around anywhere, it's going to be in Pittsburgh. But I don't see the Steelers looking at it saying, hey, yeah, let's bring him over here and, you know, let's figure that out right now. Just don't see it happening. Last name I want to talk about. Interesting name that we have not brought up yet on this podcast, that really has not made much noise when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers at all. Mekhi Becton, offensive tackle, former Jet. Believe he was a first-round pick a couple of years back.
Yeah, he was like a top 5 pick, wasn't he?
Yeah, big name.
Top 10. Never
really panned out in New York. Dealt with some injuries. Then last year it was like there's some confidence issues Aaron Rodgers was talking about, what could happen, blah, 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 blah. He's a free agent. Hasn't signed anywhere. According to Pro Football Focus, he could be looking at like a 1-year, $5 million deal. I mean, could play both the right and the left side, has experience on both. He's only 24 years old. When it comes to the Steelers, you got to look at Dan Moore and take that into account and say, when you're looking at options, the options always have to be compared to, are they a better option than Dan Moore Jr.? You look at Mekhi Becton, is he a name that the Steelers could consider? And if it's not right now, do you think it's a name that they could consider after the NFL draft if they do not add a first or a second round offensive tackle in the NFL draft?
Yeah, I actually really like the idea of adding Becton, especially at a year and $5 million. Like, that's, yeah, why not? Like, you know, that seems kind of not necessarily a no-brainer, but at worst, he would be insurance for Dan Moore. Like, if Dan Moore really stinks, or even if Becton, like, if his injury issues pop up, like, you've got someone, like, I don't know, they're clearly very comfortable with Dan Moore, to be quite. Like, it seems like they are not freaking out about maybe being able to get a tackle or not getting a tackle in the NFL draft. So I think taking a flyer on Becton, who clearly has massive upside, former top 5 pick, I'm pretty sure that's right. Like, I'm pretty sure he was like number 4 or something, or if not top 10. Like, the guy has a draft pedigree. He's huge. if you can just hope that he's past the injury issues, and if he can, I don't know, stay on the field relatively consistently, like I like this a lot, especially at, again, a year and $5 million. Like, that is nothing. That is nothing for a guy who can play both sides of the line, who, again, just at very worst, be a pretty solid backup. Like that, this seems like it would be a nice fit for Becton and for the Steelers. Like, he could kind of come along a little bit slowly. Like, there's not immediate pressure to start and be an anchor of a left or right tackle. I think it would work. Like, and if there are confidence issues, then, like, let's let him, like, rebuild it a little bit. Let's let him, let's let him do that. And who knows, maybe he is better than Dan Moore, and maybe he leaps him on the depth chart during training camp, and we're having a different conversation. I think it would make a lot of sense, and I wouldn't hate this at all for the Steelers or for Becton.
No, I agree. So he was the 11th pick in the 2020 draft, but I recall, like, he was the dude, super young, massive human being. Like, that was just a name. Like, he was one of the guys coming out of that class. I agree with you. I think, honestly, it makes, whether the Steelers add an offensive tackle or not in the NFL draft, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think Becton might be, if they add an offensive tackle in the NFL draft and that's their guy, I still think Becton might be a better move than Dan Moore Jr. just because he has experience playing both sides, which means he could be a swing tackle. Dan Moore could not be a swing tackle. He struggled mightily trying to play on the right side last season. I mean, he's 24 years old, so he's younger than Dan Moore Jr. 1 year, $5 million deal. You're not paying him much. Who cares? And you only got Dan Moore for 1 year, too. Why not? Why not replace Dan Moore with the guy who could be a starter, possibly, or at worst is a good quality swing tackle that you're looking at and going, why not? Why not have a quality swing tackle instead of a guy who can only play the left side, who has backed your way into a corner now? Because if, say Broderick does go to the right side, Armarius Mims comes in, Armarius Mims has an injury history. What if he's not ready? What if he's, not capable of playing all 17 games in an NFL season? Now you're looking at Spencer Anderson being your right tackle because Dan Moore can't play, or you're moving Broderick Jones over to the right side again. That's not what you want. I think Becton kind of makes a lot of sense for the Steelers. I would be very open to that, especially for a 1 year, $5 million deal at this point in the offseason. Like, why not? I don't think the Steelers should attach themselves to Dan Moore in any way unless they have to, and I'm comfortable with having to if that's where you find yourself in a month. But if you find yourself with options, like, why not take an option? You got one. This is a 1 year transition year. This is all this is for the Pittsburgh Steelers, no matter what. So make it the best transition year you could come up with, and I think Becton's a better move there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a lottery ticket, and that's this is fine. This is a fine way to spend this money, I think, is to take a shot on a guy who, like, I don't know, we've never really seen Mekhi Becton play a full season. Like, at some point, I'm curious to see what a guy with his kind of draft pedigree could do with a full season. I'm right there with you. Like, this is a lottery ticket. Take your chance, and this is one of the easiest ways that you could take a shot like this. And there's no way, like, I don't know, it's rare that you get a guy with this kind of upside for this cheap, to add to your roster, and, like, to be able to take just a 1 year flyer on him seems like so easy, and, like, such a, I don't know, it's kind of a no-brainer, to be quite honest. Like, I don't know why there aren't more teams who are like, yeah, we can take a shot for $5 million. Like, that's nothing in the grand scheme of things.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if we're over here talking about, like, oh, we'll find a place for Justin Simmons, who cares? You want to allocate $5 million, go hand it to Mekhi. And that's the thing, is I doubt, like, it's always less than what the estimated value is. Always. So if it's $5 million in a month from now, maybe it's $2.5 million. And at that point, dude, income no matter what. Like, it doesn't, who cares if he's just bring him in to compete. Like, I think that's the biggest thing here is you don't lose any money if you just bring somebody in to compete and say, hey, look, are you better than Dan Moore? Are you better than Spencer Anderson? Are you better than a rookie? Cool. You're 24 years old. You have an opportunity. And if you're Mekhi Becton, you can't be looking at this saying, like, oh, there's a bunch of opportunities elsewhere. Pittsburgh might be the this is my best opportunity for any available offensive tackle who wants to be a starter in the NFL. Right now, it's Dan Moore Jr., and a lot of these guys got to be thinking, I could probably beat out Dan Moore Jr. or play the right side or whatever. I think both sides, it makes a ton of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. A name that I'm shocked we have not talked about, to be quite honest with you, up until this point, but a name that I think will probably gain some traction now that we move closer to the NFL draft, and now that we're on to tier 6 of free agency. So, go get whoever's left, and Mekhi Becton. He would be a very, very interesting name for the Pittsburgh Steelers. With that, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as always, find all of our work at allsteelers.com and InsideThePanthers.com. Make sure to go subscribe to our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk Clips, for even more of our content. And if you're staring at the sun today, make sure you got some special glasses on. I don't know where to find them, but good luck. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.